This is wrestling's greatest moments.
Hey now, wrestling fans, it's time for another episode of Wrestling's Greatest Moments. There are many reasons Madison Square Garden has earned the nickname the Mecca of Professional Wrestling, including the many great moments that took place there. Sit back as Wrestling's Greatest Moments looks at Madison Square Garden Magic, the night the Garden went silent. We'll look at the night Bruno Sammartino dropped the WWWF Championship to Ivan Koloff after an incredible reign, and why promoter Vince McMahon Sr. was forced to take the title off Bruno. Before we get started though, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Wrestling Superman. Nowadays, the thought of a champion holding the belt for over 7.5 years is inconceivable. However, by the beginning of 1971, Bruno Sammartino had been Worldwide Wrestling Federation WWWF champion for most of the title's existence. What was it like for fans when a champion was upended after such a long reign, and how did promoters book such a loss? And would the fans accept it? Bruno Sammartino was the WWWF standard bearer since his momentous victory over Nature Boy Buddy Rogers on May 17, 1963. Sammartino battled Rogers in Madison Square Garden for the belt in an amazing encounter where he defeated Rogers in just 48 seconds. Rogers reportedly suffered a heart attack the month before, and despite efforts to work limited matches, he was in rough shape. As wrestling historian Tim Hornbaker explains in Capital Revolution, The Rise of the McMahon Wrestling Empire, once word got out to the various state athletic commissions, as well as to the National Wrestling Alliance, Rogers was slated to be suspended for medical reasons and declared ineligible to appear anywhere the organization governed. He would thereby be prevented from passing the championship to another grappler prior to being forcibly retired. Some of Rogers' critics have always questioned whether he really suffered a heart attack, much as they questioned previous instances where the Nature Boy claimed to be injured. Regardless, the switch was made, and Sammartino became WWWF champion. On a side note, there's still debate about when Vince McMahon's Capital Wrestling officially adopted the WWWF name, and while Rogers was recognized as McMahon's champion, fans were told that Rogers captured the title in a fictional tournament in Rio de Janeiro. Sound familiar? Date when the title became the WWWF Championship remains elusive. Bruno spent the next 7.5 years, 7 years, 8 months, and a day, if you want to get specific, defending the belt in the Northeast. He faced various challenges in singles matches and tag matches, sometimes losing matches, but never losing the title. Bruno was a top draw, and it seemed like his reign would go on forever. The fans were tired of seeing him. Unfortunately for the promotion, Bruno was growing tired of the furious pace of being a champion and the toll it was taking on his body. He wanted to lose a belt and made it clear to promoter Vince McMahon, Vincent Jesse McMahon, aka Vince Sr., was a careful man who had taken his promotion through good and bad times. The promotion's world champion had to be a top draw, and Sammartino would be a tough act to follow. What worked in one promotion didn't always work in another. For example, a wrestler who relied on an array of amateur wrestling holds might be ideal in the National Wrestling Alliance, NWA, but not so in the WWWF, where fans were used to the power-based brawling of champion Bruno Sammartino. Bruno's mixture of brawling and submission holds suited the fans in the WWWF just fine. His replacement would have to suit the fans' wishes in terms of style and his overall appeal. Vince McMahon knew that a significant portion of Bruno's popularity was his appeal to Italian Americans. Stars such as Antonio Rocca and Jose Miguel Perez, who formed a legendary tag team, brought in thousands of fans to the Garden during the 1950s and 1960s, appealing to both Italian American and Puerto Rican fans. McMahon knew that he could target key demographics because fans like to cheer for heroes based on race and ethnicity, although those were not the only factors. Granted, Bruno had the appeal of an everyman, someone the average fan could relate to for his work ethic and refusal to quit. However, it would be an error to discount his appeal to Italian American fans. As Jesse Ventura often noted during his days as a color commentator, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. In Vince McMahon Sr.'s case, he was both. A new wrestling program, Lucha Libre, broadcast in Spanish, increased the potential Spanish-American fans. McMahon decided to try things with Puerto Rican wrestler Pedro Morales. Morales would be the next man to carry the WWWF banner as a babyface, McMahon likely suspected the fans wouldn't embrace the man who defeated their beloved Bruno for the title. Instead, McMahon searched for a heel champion to transfer the belt from Bruno to Pedro. The heel wouldn't hold the belt for long, but he would take the heat as the man who upended Bruno. McMahon had many wrestlers to choose from. The WWWF attracted some of the top talent in the world, and Bruno battled many of the wrestling world's top heels during his title reign. McMahon found his transitional champion in Ivan Koloff, a fearsome powerhouse wrestler who had battled Sammartino before. The man who became best known as the Russian Bear, Ivan Koloff, was born in Canada in 1942. He wanted to be a wrestler when he was a child, and left school at 17 to begin training as a professional wrestler. Koloff wrestled early on as Red McNulty, an Irish heel with an eye patch, who terrorized babyfaces. In 1967, he transformed into Ivan Koloff, debuting in Montreal, Canada as a heel and winning championship gold in the territory. Koloff began wrestling in the WWWF in 1969, teaming up with fellow heel Waldo Von Erich to take on the popular team of Victor Rivera and Gorilla Monsoon. On October 11, 1969, Koloff fought WWWF champion Bruno Sammartino in Sammartino's hometown of Pittsburgh for over 16 minutes until the match was stopped due to blood loss. The Pittsburgh rematch on November 14th saw Sammartino win by submission, but this rivalry was only beginning. Koloff amassed win after win in the WWWF. On December 9th, 1969, Sammartino and Koloff met in Madison Square Garden, the match being stopped once again due to blood loss. At the time, match finishes were often reused in different venues, since few fans knew what happened in these other parts of the country. According to Tim Hornbaker, the Garden rematch sold superbly, and McMahon knew he had an ace in the hole when it came to Koloff. Koloff was working in Hawaii when wrestler Pedro Morales informed him that Bruno Sammartino needed time off and would be dropping the championship. Little did Koloff realize, but he would be the man to beat Bruno. According to Koloff's memoir, I called Vince McMahon Sr. to find out exactly what he wanted. He wanted me to return to New York, where he would give me a big push for 4 months, then have me take the belt from Bruno. 3 weeks later, I would lose the belt to Pedro, and then I would stay for another year to work a program with him. McMahon put his plan into place, but could he and the players involved pull it off? There were no guarantees in wrestling, and McMahon knew that much was riding on the main event booked for Madison Square Garden on Monday, January 18th, 1971. Dead silence came down. They couldn't believe it. 1971 was just starting as fans went to the Garden to witness another title defense by Bruno. In music, George Harrison was at the top of the Billboard Hot 100 with the song My Sweet Lord. The CBS series All in the Family had debuted less than a week before and would quickly rise to the top of the ratings, changing the landscape of television. At the box office, Love Story was crushing it with its message of love means never having to say you're sorry. If you wanted to head to the movies, you could drop $3,395 for a 1971 Ford Mustang, and the average price for a gallon of gas was only 39 cents. Wrestling fans had seen Bruno withstand the onslaught of the toughest heels in the business. Names like Gorilla Monsoon, Crusher Verdue, Dr. Jerry Graham, and many others took Sammartino to the limit, but he refused to lose. As mentioned, even Ivan Koloff had tried his best against Bruno, only to taste defeat. As far as the fans were concerned, Bruno was invincible, and tonight's match would be no different. That changed on the night of January 18th, 1971. A reported crowd of 21,666 people at Madison Square Garden, a record at the time, saw Bruno and Ivan engage in a titanic struggle that went on for 14 minutes and 55 seconds. The match was a classic, with an amazing display of fast-paced moves such as arm drag, submission wrestling, and plain brawling. It was a match that could have gone either way. One mistake led to Bruno's downfall. He charged Koloff in the corner, only for the Russian Bear to raise a knee, with Bruno running into it. Koloff body slammed a dazed Sammartino, then climbed to the top rope, coming off with a boot to Sammartino's chest. A 3 count later, and the Garden went silent. Legend has it that the ring announcer feared a riot and did not dare to announce Koloff as the new WWWF champion. The crowd went silent as fans witnessed the unthinkable. Koloff's manager, Captain Lou Albano, would recall, dead silence came down. They couldn't believe it. Bruno Sammartino's record reign as WWWF champion had finally ended. The title loss left Bruno with mixed feelings. In his autobiography, Bruno remembers, "Eventually the dressing room cleared, and I was left to my own thoughts. I remembered being in the same dressing room nearly 8 years earlier when I had just won the title, and how strong my sense of pride had been, how great my feelings of responsibility to my fans had been. This night, though, I felt a great sadness. Perhaps I had let them all down, the fans, my family, the promoters." Fortunately, it didn't take Bruno long to realize what he had ahead of him. Then, a new feeling came over me. I actually started to feel good about my possibilities. I had put in my time, and my financial situation was certainly not the same as it had been in those early days. I had my home, my financial security, and my family. I started to think maybe this whole thing is going to be okay because now I can go home and spend time with my family. And what of newly crowned champion Ivan Koloff? It was a pleasant experience working for McMahon, especially as champion. As Koloff tells it, "I always got along well with Vince Sr. He was one of my 2 favorite promoters, the other being Paul Bosch. Vince was a gentleman. He showed respect for me, and from what I could see, he showed the same respect for the rest of his talent. He was always willing to talk business. If I had a complaint, he always took time to listen and talk to me. Money was never an issue either. I had a good deal while I was there. During one 2-month period, I made $32,000. As a champion, I got 5% of the gross. McMahon took care of Koloff. According to the Russian Bear, McMahon told him he wanted him in the WWWF for a year. As a result, Koloff leased a home for his stay in the territory. However, McMahon later told Ivan there was a change of plans. Needless to say, Koloff didn't like how this would affect him. He recalls telling McMahon, "Wait a minute, I moved back to New York with the promise of working here for a year or more? I have a lease on my apartment and was secure in the fact that I would be making a certain amount of money over the next year." According to Koloff, McMahon made things right. "I know you'll suffer financially from the move," he said, "so for the remainder of the time you're here, I'll pay you an additional $1,500 a week on top of your payoffs. You could make $5,000 per week." Koloff was satisfied, one of many stories of how wrestlers enjoyed working for Vince McMahon Sr. A new champion was in the wings as the WWWF prepared to put its top prize around the waist of babyface Pedro Morales. However, for the next 3 weeks, Ivan Koloff would wear the WWWF belt, competing in singles and tag team matches as the promotion's champion. Koloff's reign would last less than a month, but his name ranks among a handful of elites who held a world championship when the title had prestige and meant much more than it does today. Koloff would lose the belt in a match in Madison Square Garden in February, setting another attendance record. But that's a story for another day. Have you seen footage of Bruno's shocking loss to Ivan Koloff? Share your thoughts in the comment section and let us know if there's any videos you'd like Wrestling's Greatest Moments to cover. In the meantime, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, follow us on X and Instagram, and spread the good news about Wrestling's Greatest Moments, the channel that celebrates the squared circle.